My wife's boss sent me a text with my wife's phone at 1 a.m. She's occupied now. She'll call later. I responded, no need. You can have her. We're done. 10 minutes later, my wife and her boss were at my door, clearly in distress, begging, look, I'm not saying I have a sixth sense or anything, but when your phone buzzes at 10:03 in the morning with that specific angry wasp vibration that screams, your life is about to get complicated. You just know something's gone sideways. I was half asleep, drooling on a pillow that smelled vaguely like old Chinese takeout and broken dreams when my phone lit up like a disco ball at a funeral. The blue light cut through my bedroom darkness with all the subtlety of a freight train crashing through a library. I grabbed the phone with the coordination of a drunk giraffe, squinting at the screen like it might suddenly make sense if I just focused hard enough. The notification said it was from Rachel, my wife. Rachel, the woman who promised to love me through sickness and health, and apparently also through really terrible life choices. But here's the kicker that made my stomach drop faster than a lead balloon. The actual Cinder name displayed was G. Price Work. Her boss, Dr. Gavin Price, the kind of guy who probably practiced his sympathetic doctor face in the mirror every morning while flossing with organic gluten-free dental tape. The message itself was short, sweet, and about as comforting as a cactus hug. She's occupied now. She'll call later. I stared at those words. Then I stared some more. I read them backwards, forwards in Pig Latin, trying to find some alternate interpretation where occupied meant something innocent like busy saving lives or stuck in a really long staff meeting about proper hand-washing techniques. But my brain, that traitorous bastard, kept circling back to the only conclusion that made sense at 1:03 in the freaking morning. My wife was with her boss and he felt comfortable enough using her phone to text me like I was some annoying telemarketer he could brush off with a canned response. The rage hit me like a tidal wave made of pure crystallized what the actual hell. But I'm a locksmith by trade, former cop by history, and a dramatic son of a gun by nature. So I channeled all that fury into crafting the perfect response. My thumbs flew across the keyboard with the precision of a surgeon and the pettiness of a reality TV villain. I typed, no need. You can have her. We're done. Then I added a period at the end because nothing says, I'm dead serious and you just nuke your own life quite like proper punctuation. Grammar is the ultimate power move when you're ending a marriage via text at 1 o'clock in the morning. I hit send with the same satisfaction I imagine people feel when they drop the mic after a killer speech. Then I set my phone face down on the nightstand, rolled over, and tried to convince myself I could actually fall back asleep after essentially detonating a nuclear bomb in the middle of my marriage. Spoiler alert, I could not. My brain was doing the mental equivalent of running laps while screaming and occasionally stopping to replay every moment of the last few months, looking for signs I'd missed, red flags I'd ignored, and excuses I'd swallowed like bad medicine. 10 minutes passed. 10 minutes that felt like 10 years, during which I alternated between righteous indignation and the kind of soul-crushing sadness that makes you want to ugly cry into your pillow while eating ice cream straight from the container. I was right in the middle of composing a mental list titled Things I Should Have Noticed, You Idiot. When I heard it, the frantic pounding on my front door that sounded like someone was trying to beat their way through solid wood using nothing but pure panic and poor decision-making skills. Then came the voices. Oh, the voices. Rachel's voice pitched high with that particular frequency of distress that women use when they realize they've been caught red-handed and need to engage emergency damage control protocols. And underneath hers, a deeper male voice that had to belong to Dr. Gavin. I text other men's wives from their phones, Price himself. They were both talking over each other, a cacophony of pleading and explaining, and what sounded suspiciously like the verbal equivalent of throwing spaghetti at a wall to see what sticks. I hauled myself out of bed with all the enthusiasm of a man walking to his own execution, threw on the same jeans I discarded on the floor 6 hours earlier, and shuffled to the front door like a zombie who'd just been denied his morning coffee. Through the peephole, I got my first good look at the disaster unfolding on my doorstep. And let me tell you, it was better than any reality TV show I'd ever hate-watched. Rachel was still in her scrubs, those blue hospital pajamas that apparently double as I'm having an affair camouflage, and her mascara was running down her face in thick black rivers that made her look like a raccoon who'd just been through a particularly emotional therapy session. Her hair was a mess. That specific kind of mess that happens when you've been horizontal for reasons that have nothing to do with sleeping. And she was clutching her phone like it was a life preserver and she was drowning in an ocean of her own stupid choices. Next to her stood Dr. Gavin Price himself. And oh boy, he was exactly what I'd pictured, blurry-eyed, wearing one of those white coats that doctors use to broadcast their authority and superiority to us mere mortals who can't tell a spleen from a pancreas. He had that look on his face, the one that screams, I make important life or death decisions every day, and also terrible personal decisions after hours. His hair was rumpled, His clothes were wrinkled, and he had the general appearance of a man who just realized he'd walked face first into a trap of his own making. They both looked frantic, like actors who'd forgotten their lines mid-peep performance and were desperately improvising their way through the worst play ever written. Rachel was saying something about "it's not what you think and please just let me explain," while Gavin was attempting to back her up with phrases like medical emergency and complete misunderstanding that landed with all the credibility of a $3 bill. I reached for the deadbolt with deliberate slowness, drawing out the moment like a conductor preparing for the dramatic finale of a symphony click. I turned it exactly half an inch. Not enough to open, just enough to let them hear it. Then, because I'm nothing if not committed to the bid, I did the whole chain lock flourish with the kind of theatrical flair that would make a Broadway actor proud. The metal chain slid into place with a satisfying clink that said, "Oh, you're not getting in here, and I'm going to enjoy every second of making you squirm." I let them beg through that chain. I stood there in my rumpled jeans and t-shirt that said, "I lock it like it's hot." A gift from Frank that I thought was hilarious right up until this moment. Listening to them spew excuses and explanations through the 4-inch gap that might as well have been the Grand Canyon. Rachel was crying. Real tears, not the manipulative kind, which somehow made it worse. Gavin was doing his best impression of a reasonable human being, which was about as convincing as a snake trying to sell you life insurance. I narrated the whole scene in my head with enough sarcasm to power a small city. Because if I didn't laugh at the absurdity of my wife and her boss showing up at my door at 1:15 in the morning looking like they'd just fled the scene of a crime, I was definitely going to cry. And I'd be damned if I was going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break down. So I stood there, arms crossed, watching them perform their desperate duet of denial through my chain-locked door, and I thought, this is it. This is rock bottom. A locksmith who can't even keep his own marriage locked down. Getting a front row seat to the worst show on earth. Performed by the two people who were supposed to be on his side. Irony, I decided, really is a locksmith's middle name. Morning arrived with all the grace and subtlety of a hangover wearing steel-toed boots, kicking me directly in the cerebral cortex. I woke up on my couch because apparently I'd passed out there after the midnight doorstep drama festival with a sick in my neck that felt like someone had replaced my spine with a rusty pipe and the kind of headache that makes you question every life choice that led to this exact moment. The living room looked like a crime scene if the crime was man gives up on life. Empty beer bottles lined the coffee table like sad little soldiers. The TV was frozen on some infomercial for a vegetable chopper that promised to change my life. And my phone was blowing up with notifications that I absolutely did not want to read. But the universe wasn't done kicking me while I was down because at precisely 7:47 a.m. my mother called. Of course, she did. Mothers have this supernatural ability to sense when their children's lives are imploding from up to 300 meters away. And mine had the tracking skills of a bloodhound crossed with an NSA surveillance satellite. I let it ring twice before accepting that ignoring Linda Martinez was about as effective as trying to stop a tsunami with a pool noodle. Michael Anthony Martinez, she started using my full government name like I was 12 years old and had just been caught stealing cookies before dinner. I need you to tell me why Rachel's car has been parked outside the hospital staff housing for the last 3 nights. Because Dolores from church saw it and she told Patricia, who told me during our morning walk, and now half the town thinks your wife is having an affair with that doctor. I pressed the heel of my hand against my forehead and contemplated whether it was too early to start drinking again. Ma, it's not even 8 o'clock in the morning. Can we schedule this crisis for a more reasonable hour? Like never. Don't you get smart with me, Mojo. Is it true? Because if it's true, I'm going to march down to that hospital. Man, it's true. Ma, I cut her off because there was no point in pretending anymore. Small towns are like living inside a fishbowl filled with piranhas who gossip. I found out last night. Well, technically this morning at 1 a.m., which is apparently when all good marriages go to die. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds before my mother launched into a rapid-fire combination of Spanish and English that would have made a drill sergeant weep with admiration. I held the phone away from my ear and let her get it out of her system, occasionally interjecting with, "Yes, Ma," and "I know Ma" at what I hoped were appropriate intervals. After I finally extracted myself from the maternal inquisition with promises to come over for dinner later, because apparently nothing says your life is falling apart quite like your mom's enchiladas. I surveyed my kingdom of sadness. The apartment we'd shared for 3 years looked different in the harsh morning light. Wedding photos on the mantel that now felt like evidence of a crime. My police academy graduation photo hanging next to Rachel's nursing school diploma. Both of us looking so damn young and optimistic, it made me want to punch something. A ring of faded coffee cup stains on the side table that mapped out every morning we'd sat together, scrolling through our phones and pretending we were still connected. The rain started around 9 o'clock because of course it did. This was turning into a full-blown country song, and I half expected my dog to die, and my truck to break down, except I didn't have a dog, and my truck was running fine, which somehow made everything worse. Rachel showed up at 10:23 a.m. I know the exact time because I was staring at the clock, willing the day to end when I heard her key in the lock. She still had a key. I'd need to change those locks. Professional hazard of being a locksmith is knowing exactly how vulnerable your own security is. She walked in looking like she'd been through a war zone, still wearing those damn scrubs. And I wondered if that was intentional, like wearing a uniform would somehow legitimize whatever explanation she was about to serve up. "Mike, please just listen to me," she started, and I held up one hand like a traffic cop at the world's most depressing intersection. "Let me guess," I said, leaning back against the kitchen counter with my arms crossed. "It was an emergency. A medical emergency that required Dr. McDreamy to personally tend to you at 1 o'clock in the morning using your phone to text me because his fingers were too busy saving lives or whatever excuse you two workshopped on the drive over here." She flinched like I'd slapped her, but pushed forward with the kind of determination that comes from rehearsing a story until you almost believe it yourself. "There was a problem with a patient's 4-line. Gavin was helping me troubleshoot it and I was so exhausted from the double shift that I fell asleep in his office. That's it. That's all that happened." I laughed. A short bitter bark that didn't contain an ounce of actual humor. "You fell asleep in his office, right? And he just happened to use your phone to text me like he owned it. Tell me, in this heartwarming episode of Grey's Anatomy Goes to Hell, why exactly was Dr. Price comfortable enough to send me a message from your phone? Do you two share phones regularly? Is that a new hospital policy I'm not aware of? Mike, you're being ridiculous." "No, Rachel, I'm being rational, which is apparently a foreign concept in whatever reality you've been living in." I pushed off the counter and started pacing because standing still felt like surrender. "You want to know what's ridiculous? The fact that you think I'm stupid enough to buy this after-cool special you're selling." "Oh no, officer. I didn't know how the drugs got in my car." "That's what you sound like right now." Her face crumpled and she sank into the armchair. My armchair, the one I'd inherited from my grandfather, like her legs couldn't hold her up anymore. "It's been months of distance between us, Mike. Months of you working late on locksmith calls. Months of me pulling double shifts, months of us passing each other like roommates instead of partners. I felt alone. I felt invisible. So, you chose a late-night drama with your boss instead of I don't know, suggesting couples counseling instead of having one single honest conversation with your husband." I stopped pacing and looked at her dead on. "You felt alone, so you made sure I'd feel alone, too. That's some real partnership right there." She was crying now, full-on sobbing into her hands. And part of me, the part that had loved her since we met at that ridiculous hospital charity auction 6 years ago, wanted to comfort her. But the bigger part, the part that had spent the last 9 hours replaying every suspicious moment from the past few months, was too busy being angry to care about her tears. "If this was really an emergency," I said, letting the sarcasm drip from every word like acid. "Why didn't Dr. Price wear scrubs to my doorstep? Why did he show up in a white coat like he was making a house call at 1 o'clock in the morning? Did he stop to change? Was there a wardrobe consultation? Because I'm just trying to understand the logistics of this medical emergency that required both of you to show up at my door looking like you just fled a telenovela set." She didn't have an answer for that. She just sat there crying into her hands while the rain beat against the windows and turned the whole scene into exactly what it was, a tragedy that nobody asked for, but everyone saw coming. I gave Rachel exactly 45 minutes to cry in my apartment before I told her she needed to leave. Not because I'm heartless, though at that particular moment I was doing a pretty solid impression of a man whose heart had been put through a wood chipper, but because if I had to watch her sob into her hands for one more second, I was either going to start screaming or start crying myself. And neither option seemed particularly productive. She left with all the dramatic flair of a soap opera actress exiting stage left, taking her keys with her because I hadn't had the energy yet to tell her I'd be changing the locks by tomorrow morning at the latest. The second her car pulled out of the driveway, I grabbed my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the name I was looking for. Frank Sullivan, listed in my phone as Frank the Tank, Bad Ideas Department. Frank was my old partner back when I was still wearing a badge and pretending I had my life together before I'd hung up my gun and decided that picking locks was somehow less stressful than picking up the pieces of other people's disasters. Turns out I was wrong about that, but that's a different therapy session. Frank had left the force about 2 years before I did, deciding that working for the city paid in good intentions and benefits, whereas running his own private investigation firm paid in actual money and came with the added bonus of choosing which idiots to work for. He'd set up shop in a small office above a Chinese restaurant downtown, and the whole place perpetually smelled like sweet and sour pork in disappointment. It was perfect for him. I hit the call button and listened to it ring twice before Frank's voice came through. Girly and suspicious, like a bouncer interrogating someone with a fake ID. This better be important, Martinez. I'm elbow deep in a cheating spouse case and the photos I'm looking at are making me lose my faith in humanity. Frank, my wife sleeping with her boss. I found out via text message at 1 o'clock in the morning and I need someone to either talk me down from a ledge or help me dig up enough dirt to bury him. Your choice. I delivered this information with the emotional inflection of someone reading a grocery list because at this point I'd moved past hysterical and landed firmly in the neighborhood of numb. There was a pause on the other end. The kind of pause that meant Frank was processing this information and calculating exactly how deep into the mess he was about to get. Jesus Christ. Mike. Rachel. You're Rachel. The nurse who makes those little jokes about proper hand hygiene and bakes cookies for hospital fundraisers. That's the one. Turns out she's been doing a lot more than baking cookies, if you catch my drift. I sank back onto the couch and stared at the ceiling, counting the cracks in the plaster like they might spell out some kind of answer. The guy's name is Dr. Gavin Price. He's her boss at County General, drives a BMW that probably costs more than my entire year's salary, and has the kind of face that makes you want to punch it on principle. Hold that thought. I'm coming over. Don't do anything stupid in the next 20 minutes. Frank hung up before I could argue, which was probably for the best because I absolutely would have argued that everything I was thinking about doing qualified as stupid and I was going to do it anyway. True to his word, Frank showed up 19 minutes later looking exactly like Frank always looked, built like a bouncer who'd eaten a smaller bouncer for breakfast, wearing jeans and a flannel shirt that had seen better decades, and carrying 2 enormous cups of coffee that smelled like they could resurrect the dead. He handed me one without a word and settled into the armchair that Rachel had vacated, his weight making the old furniture creak in protest. Talk, he commanded, sipping his coffee like it was a life support system, and he'd die without it. Frank drank coffee the way other people breathed constantly, compulsively, and with the kind of dedication usually reserved for religious zealots or people training for ultramarathons. So, I talked. I told him everything, starting with the 103 a.m. text and ending with Rachel's pathetic explanation about falling asleep in Gavin's office after a stressful situation. I told him about the look on Gavin's face when he showed up at my door, about my mother's phone call and the fact that apparently half the town had been watching my marriage disintegrate in real time while I'd been blissfully ignorant. I told him about the coffee cup rings on my table and the wedding photos that now felt like crime scene evidence. Frank listened without interrupting, which was one of his best qualities. He just sat there drinking his coffee and occasionally nodding, letting me purge all the poison that had been building up in my system since the early morning hours. When I finally ran out of words, he set down his coffee cup and leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, fixing me with the kind of look that had probably made suspects confess to crimes they didn't commit back when he was still wearing a badge. Here's the thing about liars, Mike. They think they're smarter than everyone else. They think they can spin a story and cover their tracks and nobody will ever know the truth. But liars always make mistakes because they're too busy remembering the lies to remember the details. He picked up his coffee again and took a long drink. You want my professional opinion? This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't some moment of weakness or a bad decision made in the heat of the moment. This has been going on for a while and they've been careful about it, which means there's a pattern. And patterns leave evidence. What kind of evidence? I asked, leaning forward, because suddenly this felt less like wallowing in self-pity and more like actually doing something productive with my rage. Paper trail, bank records, phone logs, credit card statements. People lie, Mike. People lie all the damn time. But phones don't lie. Money doesn't lie. Digital footprints don't lie. Frank was getting animated now, shifting into his investigator mode like a superhero putting on a cape. You want to know the truth? I mean, the real actual documented truth that holds up in divorce court and makes your lawyer smile, then we need to look. Not shotgun revenge, not yet. Just good old-fashioned fact-finding, detective work, the boring, methodical kind that actually gets results. I felt something shift in my chest. Some combination of relief and purpose that made me sit up straighter. I want to look. I want to know everything. Every text, every call, every time they met up and thought they were being clever. I want the whole damn story. That's what I like to hear. Frank grinned. And it was the kind of grin that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Now tell me everything you know about this Dr. Price character. Where he works, where he lives, what kind of car he drives, if he's got a history. I'll start running background checks, see what skeletons are hiding in his closet. Guys like this, doctors with God complexes who think they can screw around with their subordinates. They usually have a pattern. This probably isn't the first time, which means there might be other victims, other stories, other people who'd love to see him get what's coming to him. I could use my locksmith skills to help with the investigation. I offered, only half joking. Open some closed cases. Literally, Frank groaned and threw a couch pillow at my head. Jesus Christ, Martinez. That's the worst pun I've heard all week, and I spent yesterday talking to a bail bondsman who exclusively communicates in dad jokes. But yeah, your skills might actually come in handy if we need to, let's say, gain access to certain areas for documentary purposes. Documentary purposes. I like that. Very professional. I was actually smiling now, which felt bizarre given that my life was currently on fire. But there was something about having a plan, having Frank in my corner. That made the whole disaster feel less like drowning and more like swimming toward shore. I'll start digging into Price's background today, Frank said, standing up and draining the last of his coffee. Public records, professional history, any complaints filed against him, social media presence, the works. You focus on documenting everything from your end. Every conversation with Rachel, every suspicious detail you remember from the last few months, every piece of evidence that might be useful, write it down, screenshot it, save it. We're building a case here. And cases are built on details. He headed for the door, then turned back with that serious expression he used to wear when we were about to raid a drug house back in the day. Mike, one more thing. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. You need to be prepared for that. When you start digging into people's secrets, you don't always like what you find. You ready for that? I thought about Rachel crying in my armchair. I thought about Gavin's smug face at my doorstep. I thought about the 103 a.m. text and the 9 hours of hell that had followed. Yeah, I said, I'm ready. 3 days after Frank started his investigation, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It came through at 2:47 p.m. on a Thursday while I was in the middle of rekeying the locks at a real estate office, sweating through my work shirt, and contemplating whether I should just change my own damn locks already or continue living in this weird limbo where my cheating wife technically still had access to my apartment. The text was short and cryptic in that way that immediately makes you think either someone's trying to sell you car insurance or your life is about to get more complicated. We need to talk. It's about Rachel and Gavin. LLA. LLA. Rachel's friend Leah. LLA Chan, who taught overpriced spin classes at that boutique fitness studio downtown where people paid $40 to ride a stationary bike in a dark room while someone yelled motivational garbage at them. Leah, who posted Instagram stories of her green smoothies and acai bowls with captions about wellness journeys and finding your authentic self. Leah, who I'd always privately suspected was one of those people who preached health and positivity while secretly stress-eating cookie dough at midnight and contemplating the meaninglessness of existence. I stared at the text for a solid 30 seconds, my fingers covered in graphite and lock lubricant, trying to decide if this was a trap or an opportunity. On one hand, Leah was Rachel's friend, which meant she was potentially enemy territory. On the other hand, she was reaching out to me about Rachel and Gavin, which meant either she had information or she was about to deliver some kind of intervention that would make me want to throw myself into traffic. I texted back, coffee bean on Main. 6 p.m. Come alone and don't tell Rachel because apparently I was living in a spy movie now and everything had to be dramatic and clandestine. She responded immediately, already planning on it. See you there. The Coffee Bean was one of those aggressively hipster establishments where the baristas had ironic mustaches and the menu featured things like deconstructed lattes and artisanal cold brew infused with the tears of free-range coffee plants or whatever pretentious nonsense they were calling regular coffee these days. I showed up 10 minutes early because old cop habits die hard. Ordered something called an Americano that cost $7 and tasted like regret and claimed a corner booth where I could see the door. Leah walked in at exactly 6 o'clock and I had to hand it to her. She looked exactly like someone who was about to either save my life or ruin it further. She was wearing yoga pants and an oversized hoodie that said, Namaste in bed, carrying one of those enormous water bottles that fitness people use to prove they're hydrated and therefore superior to the rest of us mortals. Her hair was pulled back in a ponytail so tight it probably gave her a headache and she had that look on her face. The one that said she was nervous, guilty, and determined all at once. She spotted me, took a breath like she was preparing for battle, and made her way over with the kind of walk that suggested she'd rather be literally anywhere else. She slid into the booth across from me without ordering anything, which I respected because it meant she wanted to get straight to business. Thanks for meeting me, she started. And her voice had that shaky quality that people get when they're about to confess something they really don't want to confess. I've been going back and forth on whether to reach out for the last 3 days, and I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. It's eating me alive. Well, that makes 2 of us, I said, wrapping my hands around my overpriced coffee. So, What's this about? And please don't tell me you're here to defend Rachel or explain how I misunderstood the situation because I've already had my fill of gaslighting this week and it's only Thursday. Yila shook her head so hard her ponytail whipped back and forth like a pendulum of denial. No. God, no. I'm not here to defend anyone. I'm here because she stopped, pulled out her phone, and set it on the table between us like it was a live grenade. I'm here because I have proof. Proof that this is so much worse than you think. And I need you to know that I didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. And I feel like absolute garbage about it. My heart rate kicked up a notch. That old familiar feeling from my cop days when a witness was about to crack and give you the key to the whole case. What kind of proof? She unlocked her phone with trembling fingers and pulled up her screenshots folder. There's a group chat. It's called the On Call Club. It's Jesus Mike. It's disgusting. It's a bunch of doctors and nurses, mostly men, and they use it to brag about their conquests, like it's some kind of game, like the people they're sleeping with are just points on a scoreboard. She turned the phone toward me, and I felt my stomach drop as I scrolled through the screenshots. The chat was exactly what she described, crude, mean, filled with the kind of locker room talk that made you lose faith in humanity. There were names, dates, inside jokes that made my skin crawl. Emoji reactions that ranged from fire symbols to eggplants to thumbs ups. Like these people were congratulating each other on ruining marriages and betraying trust. And there, right in the middle of it all, was Gavin Price's name. Not just participating, leading. He was the ringleader of this disgusting little club, posting updates like he was some kind of conquest coordinator. Late shift scored me another point. Martinez's wife is easier than I thought. Husband's a locksmith. Ironic since he can't lock down his own marriage. Faced with tears of joy, I stared at those words until they burned into my retinas. The casual cruelty of it. The way he'd reduced Rachel to a point, a joke, a punchline in his twisted game. The way he'd thrown in that dig about me, about my profession, like it was all just hilarious entertainment for him and his band of medical professionals who'd apparently skipped the do no harm part of their training. There's more, Leia said quietly. And she scrolled down to show me additional messages. Rachel's name appeared multiple times. Details about their encounters that made me want to throw my $7 coffee against the wall. Comments from other members of the chat congratulating Gavin, making jokes, treating the whole thing like it was fantasy football, but with real people's lives. How long has this been going on? I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. The chat's been active for at least 2 years from what I can tell. Rachel's name started appearing about 4 months ago. Hila pulled her phone back and hugged it to her chest like it contained classified information. Mike, I need you to understand. I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know it was this bad. Rachel told me she was interested in someone at work, that there was chemistry, and her voice cracked. I helped her cover. I lied for her. I told you she was with me on nights when she wasn't. I thought it was just flirting, maybe some harmless emotional affair that would fizzle out. I didn't know there was a whole hunting club treating women like trophies. I wanted to be angry at her. Part of me was angry at her. But the bigger part recognized that she was here now with evidence looking like she wanted to crawl into a hole and die from guilt. That counted for something. Why are you showing me this now? I asked, what changed? I saw the messages from the night you found out. After you texted Gavin, the chat went crazy. They were laughing about it, Mike. Laughing about you finding out, making jokes about how you'd react, taking bets on whether Rachel would go back to you or stick with Gavin. She looked like she might cry, and I noticed for the first time that she probably hadn't slept much in the last few days. And that's when I realized this wasn't some romantic affair or forbidden love story. This was predatory. This was cruel. These are people with power using that power to manipulate others and then bragging about it like they're collecting baseball cards. I laughed. A dark, throat-clearing sort of laugh that contained zero actual humor and 100% bitter recognition of how absurd my life had become. Let me get this straight. My wife's having an affair with her boss who's part of some kind of medical professional sex club where they share notes on their conquests like they're comparing their fantasy football lineups. And you helped cover for her because you thought it was romantic. Does that about sum it up? When you say it like that, it sounds even worse, Leia whispered. That's because it is worse. It's cartoonishly bad. It's so bad it loops back around to being almost funny. Except on the punchline, so it's actually just soul-destroying. I rubbed my face with both hands. Can you send me those screenshots? Already done. I airdropped them to your phone while you were reading. She finally reached for her water bottle and took a long drink like she needed to hydrate after purging all these secrets. There's something else you should know. I'm not the only one who helped cover. There are other people, friends, co-workers, who knew things were happening and either didn't care or actively participated in keeping secrets. This whole thing is bigger than just Rachel and Gavin. Of course it is, I muttered. Because why would my personal disaster be contained and manageable when it could be a full-blown conspiracy involving multiple accomplices? Leah stood up, gathering her things with the energy of someone who just completed a mission and desperately needed to escape. I'm sorry, Mike. I'm so sorry I was part of this. I'm going to have to live with that guilt for a long time. But I thought you deserved to know the truth. All of it. I looked at her, really looked at her, and saw someone who probably did drink kale smoothies while hiding whiskey in her water bottle. Someone who preached wellness while drowning in her own mess. Someone who was trying to do the right thing, even though it was way too late. Thanks for this, I said, gesturing to my phone where the screenshots now lived. I mean that. This is proof. Proof is a delicious cold thing. Yila, you just gave me ammunition. She nodded and left without another word, leaving me alone in my corner booth with my cold coffee and my smoking gun. I pulled up the screenshots again and scrolled through them slowly, methodically, memorizing every crude joke and casual cruelty. They thought they were untouchable. They thought they could keep their little club secret, laugh at their victims, and never face consequences. They forgot that every lock has a key, and I was very, very good at finding them. Frank showed up at my apartment 4 days after my coffee shop confession session with Leah, carrying a folder that was thicker than my old police vest, and had that particular weight that comes from containing someone's entire history of being a garbage human being. He didn't knock, just used the spare key I'd given him back when we were partners. And I still believed in things like trust and friendship, and walked in to find me sitting at my kitchen table, surrounded by printouts of the On-Call Club screenshots, a legal pad covered in notes that probably made me look like a conspiracy theorist, and enough empty coffee cups to qualify as a health hazard. You look like hell, Frank said by way of greeting, setting the folder down on the table with a thud that sent some of my papers flying. When's the last time you slept or showered or consumed anything that wasn't liquid caffeine? Bold words coming from a man who considers coffee a food group? I shot back, but I couldn't really argue with his assessment. I'd been living in the same pair of sweatpants for 2 days. My hair was doing something that could charitably be called abstract art. And I'm pretty sure I smelled like a combination of lock lubricant, desperation, and poor life choices. Please tell me that folder contains something that will make me feel better about the fact that my wife joined a sex cult and I was too stupid to notice. It's not a sex cult. It's just a group of entitled with medical degrees and no moral compass. Frank corrected, dropping into the chair across from me. But yeah, this folder is going to make your whole week, maybe your whole month, possibly your whole year, depending on how much you enjoy watching people get what they deserve. He flipped open the folder with the dramatic flair of a magician revealing his best trick. And I found myself staring at a collection of documents that looked like they'd been compiled by someone with an axe to grind and a really good filing system. Complaint forms, HR reports, legal documents with official-looking letterheads, personnel files that probably weren't supposed to be accessible to civilians, but Frank had ways of obtaining things that I'd learned long ago not to ask too many questions about. Meet Dr. Gavin Price's greatest hits collection, Frank announced, tapping the top document with one finger. Turns out your wife's boyfriend has a history longer than a CVS receipt and about as pleasant to look at. I'm talking complaints going back 7 years, 3 different hospitals, and a pattern of behavior that would make a behavioral psychologist salivate with how textbook it is. I pulled the first document closer, squinting at the dense legal language that seemed specifically designed to obscure the actual content while still technically documenting it. It was a complaint filed by a nurse named Jennifer Kaufman back in 2018 detailing how Drive Price had made repeated inappropriate comments about her appearance, suggested they discuss her career advancement opportunities over drinks, and then became hostile and vindictive when she declined his advances. The complaint had been filed with HR at his previous hospital, investigated for approximately 30 seconds, and then quietly filed away with a note that said, "Matter resolved through mediation." Matter resolved through mediation. I read aloud, letting the sarcasm drip from every syllable. That's corporate speak for we paid her to go away and hope nobody would notice. Right. Bingo. Frank pulled out another document. This one from a different hospital in 2019. This is Jessica Torres. Similar story. Dr. Price pursued her aggressively. She initially reciprocated because she was young and flattered that a senior physician was paying attention to her. And then when she tried to end things, he made her work life a living hell, switched her to the worst shifts, gave her poor performance reviews, made comments in front of other staff about her being emotionally unstable. She filed a complaint, and surprise, surprise, it was resolved through a confidential settlement that included an NDA. He kept pulling documents out of that folder like a depressing magic trick that just kept going. Sarah Chun in 2020, Amanda Rodriguez in 2021, Melissa Grant in 2022. Each story followed the same basic pattern with slight variations. Dr. Gavin Price identified a target, usually someone younger or in a subordinate position, pursued them with a combination of charm and professional intimidation, got what he wanted, and then either discarded them or made their lives miserable when they tried to assert boundaries. And every single time, the hospital administration had responded with what could generously be called aggressive apathy and more accurately be called active cover-up. How many are there? I asked, feeling something cold and angry settling in my chest like a block of ice that had decided to take up permanent residence that I could find with a week of digging. 8 documented complaints across 3 different hospitals. But here's the thing, Mike. Those are just the ones who actually filed formal complaints. You know how many people experience harassment or assault and never report it? The numbers are depressing as hell. For every complaint in this folder, there's probably 3 or 4 other people who stayed quiet because they were scared of retaliation or didn't think anyone would believe them or just wanted to move on with their lives. Frank pulled out another section of documents. These ones looking more recent and official. And this is the really interesting part. County General where he works now, where Rachel works. They knew. They freaking knew about his history when they hired him 2 years ago. They did a background check. They saw the complaints and they hired him anyway because he's a good doctor with an impressive resume. And apparently being a predator is just a minor personality flaw that can be overlooked if you're good at your job. I stared at the pile of evidence, feeling that cold anger crystallize into something sharp and focused. So, what you're telling me is that this guy has been doing this for years. Multiple women have tried to hold him accountable and the system just keeps protecting him because hospitals are more interested in covering their asses than actually dealing with the problem. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Frank confirmed, this guy knows how to work the system. He knows which lines to not quite cross. He knows how to make settlements happen quietly. He knows how to position himself as the victim when complaints get filed. He's got it down to a science. The man's basically a professional predator with a medical degree and a really good lawyer. Well, isn't that just fantastic? I muttered, running my hands through my hair and probably making it stick up in even more ridiculous directions. My wife didn't just cheat on me with some random guy. She cheated on me with a serial predator who has an entire system in place for getting away with it. I'm not sure if that makes it better or worse. It makes it ammunition, Frank said, leaning forward with that intense look he got when he was really into a case. Look, Mike, I know this is personal for you. I know you're hurt and angry and probably fantasizing about various creative ways to make this guy suffer, but here's what we're going to do. We're going to be smart about this. We're going to collect all the proof. We're going to find these women, and we're going to give them choices. What kind of choices? I asked, though I was already starting to see where Frank was going with this. The choice to come forward together. The choice to break their NDAs because NDAs don't hold up when there's a pattern of criminal behavior or when public safety is at risk. The choice to stop being isolated victims and start being a coordinated force that actually has the power to hold this bastard accountable. Frank was getting animated now, gesturing with his hands like he was conducting an invisible orchestra of justice. 1 complaint gets buried. 2 complaints get settled quietly. 8 complaints from 8 different women all coming forward at the same time. That's a pattern. That's a story. That's the kind of thing that doesn't go away with a quiet settlement and a confidential agreement. I felt something like hope stirring in my chest, mixing with the anger and the hurt and creating some kind of volatile emotional cocktail that probably wasn't healthy, but definitely felt productive. So, we reach out to these women. We show them they're not alone. We build a case that's too big to ignore. Exactly. And we document everything, every conversation, every piece of evidence, every connection between these cases. We make this airtight. Frank tapped the folder again. This guy thinks he's untouchable because he's always been untouchable. He thinks he can keep doing this forever because the system has always protected him. But systems are made of people and people can be persuaded to do the right thing when the evidence is overwhelming and the public is watching. I picked up one of the complaint forms reading through the details of how Dr. Price had systematically destroyed Jennifer Kaufman's career after she rejected him. You know what really gets me? I said it's not just that he's a predator. It's that he's smart about it. He documents things in his favor. He builds paper trails that make his victims look unstable or vindictive. He uses his position and authority to gaslight people into thinking they're the problem. This isn't some crime of passion or moment of weakness. This is calculated. This is a man who sees other people as objects to be collected and discarded, which is why we're going to take him down using his own methods, Frank said with a grim smile. He likes documentation. We'll give him documentation. He likes playing the system. We'll use the system against him. He thinks he's always 2 steps ahead. We're going to be 3 steps ahead with better evidence and more witnesses. I made a joke about Gavin's bedside manner. Must be tender as a stapler and twice as sharp. But underneath the sarcasm, the anger was humming like a live wire. This wasn't just about Rachel anymore. Wasn't just about my wounded pride or my broken marriage. This was about every woman whose name was in that folder. Every victim who'd been silenced. Every person who tried to speak up and been crushed by a system that valued reputation over justice. So where do we start? I asked Frank, already mentally preparing myself for what was coming. We start by reaching out, Frank said carefully, respectfully, and with the understanding that some of these women might not want anything to do with this. But we give them the choice. We show them the pattern. We let them know they're not alone. He stood up and gathered the folder. And then, my friend, we watched Dr. Gavin Price's carefully constructed house of cards come tumbling down. I looked at the folder at the evidence of years of harm and felt that cold anger settle into something like purpose. Good, I said. Let's get to work. Sophie Price called me on a Tuesday morning while I was in the middle of installing a smart lock system for a paranoid tech entrepreneur who was convinced his business partners were trying to steal his app idea. The name on my phone screen just said unknown caller. And normally I'd let that go to voicemail because unknown callers are usually either telemarketers trying to sell me extended car warranties or robots informing me that my social security number has been compromised and I need to send gift cards immediately to fix it. But something made me answer. Maybe intuition, or maybe just the fact that my life had become so weird that unknown callers could literally be anything from long-lost relatives to hitmen to aliens trying to make first contact. Is this Michael Martinez? The voice was female, composed, and had that particular edge that comes from someone who's done crying about their problems and moved into the strategic planning phase of revenge. Depends on who's asking and whether you're about to serve me papers, I said. Because at this point, I wouldn't have been surprised if Rachel had decided to sue me for emotional distress or some equally insane legal maneuver. This is Sophie Price, Gavin's ex-wife. She let that sink in for exactly 3 seconds before continuing. I heard through the hospital grapevine that you're collecting information about my ex-husband's extracurricular activities, and I think we should talk. I have things you'll want to see. I nearly dropped my drill. Gavin's ex-wife, the woman who'd been married to this predator before he'd moved on to terrorizing the nurses at County General. I'd known he was divorced. Frank had mentioned it in his background research. But I hadn't considered that his ex might be a potential ally in this whole mess. That was stupid of me, actually, because ex-wives are basically walking databases of dirt on their former spouses, especially when those former spouses are serial cheaters with God complexes. I'm listening, I said, stepping away from my paranoid client who was busy explaining his 17-step authentication system that would definitely keep out intruders and definitely drive him insane within 6 months. Not over the phone, lunch today. There's a diner called Rosie's on the east side. You know it. Her tone suggested this wasn't really a question so much as a statement of how things were going to be. I know it. 12:30 work for you. See you there. And Mr. Martinez, come alone. This isn't the kind of conversation that needs an audience. She hung up before I could respond, which seemed to be a theme in my life lately. People dropping bombshells and then disappearing before I could process the information properly. I finished up the smart lock installation in a daze. Took my payment from the paranoid tech guy and spent the drive to Rosie's diner trying to figure out what exactly Gavin's ex-wife wanted from me and whether this was going to be helpful or just add another layer of complexity to my already absurdly complicated situation. Rosie's Diner was one of those classic American establishments that had probably been serving coffee and disappointment since the 1950s, with red vinyl booths that were held together more by duct tape and hope than actual structural integrity, and a menu that featured things like meatloaf surprise where the surprise was probably food poisoning. I spotted Sophie the second I walked in, sitting in a corner booth with her back to the wall, like she was either paranoid or used to being in situations where knowing all the exits was important. She looked exactly like someone who'd been married to Gavin Price and lived to tell the tale. Mid-30s, professionally dressed in a way that screamed, I have a real job and real responsibilities. With dark hair pulled back in a severe bun and the kind of sharp, intelligent eyes that suggested she'd stopped being naive around the same time she'd stopped being married. She wasn't traditionally beautiful. She was better than that. She was the kind of woman who looked like she could calculate your net worth, your moral failings, and the exact amount of you were trying to sell her all in the time it took you to say hello. I slid into the booth across from her and we did that awkward thing where two people who are connected only by the fact that their respective spouse and ex-spouse are terrible human beings try to figure out how to start a conversation. You look better than I expected, Sophie said, which was possibly the strangest opening line I'd ever received. I was picturing someone more, I don't know, destroyed. Gavin has a way of destroying people. Give it time. I'm a slow motion car crash, I replied, flagging down a waitress who looked like she'd been working at Rosie's since the actual 1950s. Coffee, black, strong enough to strip paint. Sophie ordered the same, which immediately elevated her in my estimation because people who drink black coffee are either serious or dead inside. And in this context, both were acceptable. We sat in silence while the waitress shuffled off. And I used the time to study the woman across from me, trying to figure out what her angle was and whether I could trust her or if this was some elaborate setup orchestrated by Gavin to throw me off track. I'm going to cut to the chase, Sophie said once our coffees arrived. And she slid a small flash drive across the scarred Formica table like we were in a spy movie and she was passing state secrets. I kept everything. Photos, audio recordings, text messages, emails, video clips that Gavin saved on his personal computer because he's the kind of narcissist who documents his own crimes. It's all on here. I stared at the flash drive like it might explode. Why? Why keep all this? And why give it to me now? Sophie took a long drink of her coffee and I could see the weight of years of anger and hurt and strategic patience in her expression. I kept it as insurance. When I found out about Gavin's affairs, and yes, plural, your wife is far from the first. I was young enough and stupid enough to think about forgiving him. I believed his excuses about stress and long hours and how these women threw themselves at him. But I wasn't so stupid that I deleted the evidence. I backed everything up, multiple copies in multiple locations. I told myself it was just in case, just for protection, just to have leverage if things got ugly. And things got ugly, I prompted, though I already knew the answer. Things got nuclear, Sophie confirmed with a bitter smile. Gavin doesn't just cheat. He collects. He keeps score. He saves messages and photos and recordings of private moments like they're trophies. He has folders on his computer organized by name and date, ratings of his conquests, notes about which ones were easy and which ones required more work. He's not a man having affairs. He's a predator documenting his kills. My stomach turned over and I had to set down my coffee cup before I threw it against the wall. Jesus Christ, he's actually keeping records. This is some kind of sick game. It's exactly a sick game to him. And the worst part, he's smart about it. He never keeps anything that could be traced back to him professionally. No hospital emails, no work phones. Everything's on his personal devices, encrypted and password protected. He thinks he's untouchable. Sophie leaned forward and her eyes had that gleam that comes from someone who's been waiting years for the right moment to strike. But I had access to everything when we were married. I copied files before the divorce. I saved passwords. I documented patterns. And I've been sitting on this information for 3 years, waiting for the right time to use it. Why now? I asked. Why not use this during your divorce? Why not go to the police or the medical board or literally anyone with authority? Because I was scared, Sophie admitted, and there was no shame in her voice. Just cold pragmatism. Gavin has money, connections, lawyers who could bury me in legal fees until I was bankrupt. During the divorce, I used the threat of exposing him to get a better settlement, but I never actually followed through because I didn't have the resources to fight him in court and in public opinion. But you, she pointed at me with one finger. You have nothing to lose. Your marriage is already over. He's already destroyed your life. And from what I hear through the grapevine, you're building a case with multiple victims and actual evidence beyond what I have here. I picked up the flash drive, feeling its weight. Such a small thing to contain so much damage. What exactly is on here? Everything, Sophie said simply. Recordings of phone calls where he brags to his friends about his latest conquest. Video clips he secretly recorded during intimate moments. Some of the women knew they were being filmed, some didn't. Text message threads where he discusses strategy for seducing nurses and medical students. Photos he saved as mementos. And most damning of all, a spreadsheet, an actual Excel spreadsheet where he tracked names, dates, ratings, and notes about each woman. He called it his personal achievement log. I call it evidence of systematic predatory behavior. I felt a cold sense of satisfaction wash over me, the kind of feeling you get when all the scattered pieces of a puzzle suddenly click into place and form a picture that finally makes sense. This wasn't just evidence. This was the industry of excuses finally getting an invoice. This was documentation that couldn't be explained away or dismissed as misunderstanding. This was Gavin Price's own meticulous records condemning him. Why are you giving this to me? I asked one more time because I needed to understand her motivation. What do you get out of this? Sophie finished her coffee and stood up preparing to leave. I get to watch him fall. I get to know that I played a part in stopping him from hurting more people. And I get to sleep at night knowing I finally did something instead of just sitting on evidence and protecting myself. She pulled out a $20 bill and dropped it on the table for the coffee. Use it well, Mr. Martinez. Make sure it counts because if you screw this up, he'll know where the information came from, and I'll have to disappear. She walked out of the diner like a queen who'd just abdicated her throne, tired, relieved, and finally free of a burden she'd been carrying too long. I sat there with a flash drive in my hand, feeling its weight, knowing that I was now holding the key to everything. The invoice had finally arrived, and it was time to make Gavin Price pay his bill. The County General Hospital Annual Charity Gala was scheduled for Saturday, October 18th, which gave me exactly 2 weeks to transform from a bitter, angry locksmith into an audiovisual terrorist with a flair for dramatic public humiliation. The gala was one of those black tie affairs where rich people paid $500 a plate to eat rubber chicken and feel good about themselves while the hospital administration paraded around their star physicians like prized livestock at a county fair. And this year's guest of honor, the physician being celebrated for his outstanding contributions to patient care and hospital excellence, was none other than Dr. Gavin Price himself. Because apparently the universe has a twisted sense of humor and decided that the man who'd been systematically destroying lives deserved a trophy and a standing ovation. When Frank told me about the gala, I'd laughed so hard I nearly choked on my coffee. You're kidding me. They're giving him an award. What's it for? Most creative use of power dynamics. Outstanding achievement in the field of being a complete bastard. It's the Healer of the Year award. Frank had said with the kind of straight face that suggested he was also appreciating the irony given annually to a physician who demonstrates exceptional dedication to their patients and exemplary professional conduct. The nomination was apparently submitted by the hospital board before your little situation came to light and they're too far into the planning to back out now without raising questions. And that's when the idea hit me with all the subtlety of a brick through a window. Why not use the gala itself as the stage for Gavin's downfall? Why skulk around filing complaints and hoping the system would eventually work when I could literally hijack his moment of triumph and turn it into a public execution? It was elegant. It was mean. It was the kind of poetic justice that made my locksmith heart sing. Because if there's one thing I understand, it's that the best way to break into something is to use the existing infrastructure against itself. I laid out the plan to Frank over beers at his office, which still smelled like sweet and sour pork and broken marriages, while he listened with the expression of a man who was simultaneously impressed and concerned about my mental stability. So, let me get this straight, he'd said after I'd finished my pitch. You want to hack into the hospital's AV system during the gala, plug in Sophie's flash drive, and broadcast Gavin's greatest hits to a room full of donors, hospital administrators, and local media. You want to turn his awards ceremony into a true crime documentary, not hack. That sounds illegal and complicated. I prefer gain authorized access through my extensive knowledge of security systems and the fact that I personally installed the locks on the AV control room 6 months ago when the hospital upgraded their equipment. I grinned at him with a kind of manic energy that probably should have concerned me, but instead felt liberating. I'm a locksmith, Frank. I know every entrance, every access point, every vulnerable spot in that building because half the staff has called me at one point or another to let them into rooms they've locked themselves out of. I'm not breaking in. I'm just opening doors that are already there. Frank had stared at me for a long moment before breaking into a grin that matched mine. You magnificent, vengeful son of a, this is either the best idea you've ever had or the worst. And I genuinely can't tell which. Why not both? I'd replied, already mentally mapping out the logistics. Over the next 2 weeks, I became intimately familiar with the County General Hospital event space, the AV setup for the gala, and the exact sequence of events planned for the evening. I reached out to Tommy Chan, a guy I knew from my cop days who'd left the force to become an AV technician because he decided he'd rather work with equipment than people, and who owed me a favor from that time I'd helped him get out of a sticky situation involving his ex-girlfriend, a restraining order, and a misunderstanding about who actually owned the PlayStation. Tommy was more than happy to give me a crash course in basic AV system operation, especially when I told him it was for a surprise presentation at a hospital charity event. You're not going to do anything that'll get me in trouble, right? Tommy had asked nervously, showing me how to connect external drives to the projection system. Define trouble? I'd replied, which in retrospect probably wasn't the most reassuring answer. But Tommy had shrugged and showed me the rest of the system anyway because he was a good friend and also because he secretly loved the idea of chaos unfolding in formal settings. Frank handled what he called the legal infrastructure, which meant making sure we had reporters lined up who'd actually show up to the gala and pay attention when things went sideways. He reached out to Maria Gonzalez at the local news station, an investigative journalist who'd been trying to break a story about hospital misconduct for years and was basically salivating at the prospect of a scandal this juicy falling into her lap. He also contacted a few freelance journalists who specialized in medical ethics violations, plus a blogger who ran a popular site about holding powerful institutions accountable. Frank was building an audience, making sure that when the show started, there'd be people there to document it and spread the word. We're not just exposing Gavin, Frank explained over one of our planning sessions. We're creating a moment that can't be ignored or swept under the rug. We're making sure there are enough witnesses and enough media coverage that the hospital has no choice but to respond publicly instead of handling this quietly behind closed doors like they've done with every other complaint against him. Leia became our inside coordinator, the person who kept nervous nurses calm and made sure that the women who'd agreed to come forward knew what was happening and when. She'd reached out to several of Gavin's victims carefully, respectfully, explaining that there was going to be a public reckoning and asking if they wanted to be present for it or if they preferred to stay away and let their evidence speak for itself. Some chose to attend the gala, wanting to watch Gavin's face when his world collapsed. Others decided to stay home, but gave Ela permission to represent their stories. A few wanted nothing to do with any of it and asked to be left alone, which we respected because this was about giving people choices, not forcing them into another situation where they had no control. Leia was perfect for this role because she had that combination of fitness instructor peppiness and genuine empathy that made people trust her even when she was basically recruiting them for an ambush. She'd text me updates throughout the week. Got 3 more confirmed attendees. Jessica Torres wants to be there. Sarah Chun is flying in from Colorado because she says she wouldn't miss this for anything. And each message felt like another piece clicking into place. Sophie was the quiet fire in the background. The quality control specialist making sure that every file on the flash drive was authentic, admissible, and devastating. She went through the recordings and photos with the kind of meticulous attention to detail that suggested she'd been preparing for this moment for years, organizing everything chronologically, creating a presentation that told a clear story from beginning to end. She put together a highlight reel that was only 12 minutes long, but contained enough evidence to bury Gavin 6 feet under, complete with audio clips of him bragging about his conquests, screenshots of the on-call club chat, and excerpts from his infamous spreadsheet with names redacted to protect the victims, but numbers clearly visible. 12 minutes, Sophie had told me when she handed over the finalized flash drive. That's all you need. 12 minutes of his own words, his own documentation, his own systematic predation laid out in a way that even the most willfully ignorant administrator can't dismiss. I've timed it to sync with the planned award presentation. Right after they announce his name and he takes the stage, you start the video. Maximum impact, maximum humiliation. We rehearsed the plan until I could execute it in my sleep. Frank would be positioned near the exits with his journalist contacts, ready to intercept anyone who tried to shut down the presentation or flee the scene. Leia would be scattered throughout the audience with the victims who chose to attend, providing moral support and making sure everyone felt safe. Sophie would be in the back of the room watching from the shadows like the ghost of Gavin's past coming back to haunt him. And I would be in the AV control room, which I had keys to naturally because I'd installed the locks, ready to plug in the flash drive at exactly the right moment and turn the hospital celebration into a public trial. It was elegant in its simplicity. We weren't relying on the system to deliver justice. We were creating our own system using the tools available to us, fitting the key into the last lock of a house built entirely on lies and professional courtesy. The hospital wanted to celebrate Dr. Gavin Price's contributions. Fine. We'd show them exactly what he'd been contributing to. The night before the gala, I sat in my apartment with the flash drive in my hand, thinking about how I'd gone from a locksmith with a failing marriage to a man orchestrating what was essentially a coordinated public execution using PowerPoint and a sound system. It was absurd. It was probably illegal in ways I hadn't fully considered. It was definitely going to blow up my life even more than it was already blown up. But it was also necessary because men like Gavin Price don't stop on their own. They don't develop consciences or suddenly decide to change their behavior. They keep going until someone stops them, until the cost of their actions finally exceeds the benefit, until the locks they've been hiding behind get picked by someone who knows exactly how locks work. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop one more time, watching Sophie's carefully crafted presentation playthrough. 12 minutes of truth, 12 minutes of receipts, 12 minutes of a man condemning himself with his own evidence. If this becomes a soap opera, I expect royalties, I muttered to myself, channeling my nervous energy into sarcasm, because that's what I did best. Tomorrow night, Dr. Gavin Price would walk onto that stage expecting applause and admiration. Instead, he'd get accountability, served cold in public. I couldn't wait. The morning of the gala arrived with the kind of ominous gray sky that suggested even the weather knew something dramatic was about to go down and wanted to set the appropriate mood. I woke up at 6 a.m. without an alarm. Which is what happens when your brain decides that sleep is for people who aren't about to commit social terrorism against their wife's boyfriend in front of 200 of the county's most influential citizens. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for approximately 45 seconds before giving up on the pretense of rest and hauling myself into the shower, where I stood under scalding water and mentally rehearsed the evening's plan for the 11,000th time. The flash drive was sitting on my kitchen counter next to my coffee maker, plugged into my laptop for one final review. I'd watched Sophie's presentation so many times I could probably recite the whole thing from memory, complete with the audio clips of Gavin bragging about his conquests and the screenshots of his disturbing spreadsheet. 12 minutes of carefully curated evidence that would either change everything or blow up spectacularly in my face. And at this point, I was 50-50 on which outcome was more likely. I made coffee strong enough to wake the dead and possibly power a small vehicle and was in the middle of my second cup when my phone rang. Rachel's name lit up the screen and I stared at it like it was a live grenade that had just materialized in my kitchen. She hadn't called since the morning after our doorstep confrontation 2 weeks ago, communicating only through tour text messages about logistics like who was paying which bills and whether I'd forwarded her mail. The fact that she was calling now on this specific morning meant one of two things. Either she'd somehow found out about the plan or her guilty conscience had finally kicked into overdrive. I let it ring 3 times while I debated whether answering would be cathartic or just painful. Then accepted the call because apparently I was a glutton for punishment, and also because part of me, the stupid sentimental part that remembered loving this woman, needed to hear what she had to say. Mike. Her voice came through sounding wrecked, like she'd been crying or hadn't slept, or possibly both. Mike, please don't hang up. I need to talk to you. Well, you've got me on the phone, so talk, I said, keeping my voice flat and emotionless because if I let any actual feeling through, this conversation was going to go sideways fast. Though, I have to say, your timing is interesting. Got something you need to get off your chest on this fine Saturday morning. I ended things with Gavin. She said it quickly, like ripping off a band-aid, and I could hear the desperation underneath the words. 2 days ago, I told him it was over, that I made a mistake, that I want to try to fix things with you. I know I don't deserve another chance, but Mike, we've been together for 6 years. We have history. We had something real. Please, I'm begging you to consider couples counseling. We can work through this. I laughed and it came out harsh and bitter, like broken glass being ground into salt. You ended things 2 days ago. 2 days ago, after 4 months of sneaking around, after lying to my face, after letting your boss text me from your phone at 1 o'clock in the morning like I was some irrelevant obstacle to be dismissed, and now you want counseling. Now you want to work through this, Rachel. The audacity is actually impressive. Like, if they gave out awards for sheer nerve, you'd be taking home a trophy tonight. I know I screwed up. Screwed up. I cut her off, feeling the anger that I'd been carefully controlling start to leak through. Screwed up is forgetting to take out the trash or accidentally dyeing my white shirts pink in the laundry. What you did was make a conscious choice repeatedly for months to betray me with your boss while I was home thinking we were just going through a rough patch. That's not screwing up, Rachel. That's systematic deception. She was crying now. I could hear it in her breathing. But I couldn't make myself care the way I would have even 3 weeks ago. Something fundamental had broken between us. Some foundation stone that you can't just glue back together with tears and promises of counseling. Mike, please. Her voice cracked. I love you. I never stopped loving you. Gavin was. He was a mistake. A terrible, stupid mistake that I regret more than anything. But it's over now. I've blocked his number. I've put in for a transfer to a different department. I'm doing everything I can to make this right. Let me ask you something, I said, and my voice came out colder than I'd intended, sharp enough to cut. Did Gavin record you? Did he take photos, videos, save your text messages? Did he document your relationship like it was some kind of conquest he wanted to remember? The silence that followed was deafening. It stretched out for 5 seconds, then 10. And in that silence, I heard everything I needed to know. The fear, the realization, the understanding that whatever promises Gavin had made about privacy and discretion were as worthless as his marriage vows had probably been. He promised he deleted everything. Rachel finally whispered, and she sounded small and scared and young in a way that made something twist painfully in my chest despite my anger. After I told him we were done, he said he'd delete all the messages and photos. He promised, Mike, he said. He promised. Yeah, like men in dramas promise. I interrupted and the sarcasm was back in full force because it was easier than acknowledging the part of me that still hurt for her, that recognized she'd been played by someone with a lot more experience in manipulation than she had. Let me tell you something about Gavin Price that you apparently haven't figured out yet. He doesn't delete anything. He collects, he saves, he documents every conquest like he's building a museum dedicated to his own ego and other people's bad decisions. So, no, Rachel, he didn't delete your messages. They're probably backed up in 3 different cloud storage accounts with labels and dates and maybe even ratings. Her crying intensified, dissolving into the kind of sobbing that comes from genuine fear and the dawning realization that you've been way more naive than you thought possible. Oh God. Oh God. Mike, you have to help me. If those photos get out, if people see my job, my reputation, my family, now you care about your job and reputation. The words came out harsher than I'd intended, but I was too far gone to pull them back. Where was that concern 4 months ago when you were making the choice to sleep with your boss? Where was that forward thinking when you were letting him photograph intimate moments? I didn't know. She practically shouted, and there was genuine anguish in her voice. I didn't know he was recording some of it. I didn't know he saved everything. I didn't know about the other women or the chat group where she stopped and I could hear her trying to compose herself. Wait, how do you know about all this? How do you know what Gavin does? Because unlike you, I did my homework, I said flatly. When I found out my wife was cheating, I didn't just sit around crying into my beer. I investigated. I talked to people. I found evidence. And let me tell you, Rachel, what I found is so much worse than you cheating with your boss. What I found is a pattern of predatory behavior going back years. Multiple victims, systematic abuse of power, and documentation that would make a prosecutor weep with joy. There was another long pause, and when Rachel spoke again, her voice was shaking. Mike, what are you planning to do? Why are you telling me this? Because tonight is the hospital gala, I said. And I was surprised by how calm I sounded, how collected, like I was explaining the weather instead of my plans to destroy her boyfriend's career. Tonight, Gavin gets his award for being Healer of the Year or whatever title they're giving him. And tonight, everyone at that gala is going to see exactly what kind of healer he really is. No, it came out as a whisper, then stronger. No, Mike, you can't. Please, I'm begging you. Don't do this publicly. Don't make this a spectacle. It'll destroy me, too. Everyone will know. My colleagues, my friends, my parents. You should have thought about that before you let Gavin take pictures, I said. And part of me recognized I was being cruel. But the bigger part was too angry and hurt to care. You made your choices, Rachel. You chose to have an affair. You chose to trust a man who collects women like baseball cards. You chose to believe his promises. And now you get to live with the consequences of those choices, just like I have to live with the consequences of marrying someone who betrayed me. Mike, please stop. I cut her off, suddenly exhausted by the whole conversation, by the pleading and the tears and the last-minute appeals to my better nature. Stop begging. Stop making promises you won't keep. Stop acting like you can fix this with enough crying and apologies. It's done, Rachel. We're done. Whatever you thought we had is gone, and you killed it yourself. You can hide if you want to. You can call in sick to the gala, stay home, pretend none of this is happening, but you can't unend what's already been saved. You can't delete files that have already been backed up in multiple locations. The truth is coming out whether you like it or not. And you get to decide whether you face it or run from it. She was sobbing openly now, but I felt nothing except a hollow sort of finality, like closing a door on a room you know you'll never enter again. If this becomes a soap opera, I expect royalties, I said. And I meant it half seriously. Half as a defense mechanism against the part of me that was hurting along with her despite everything. I hung up before she could respond, before she could beg more or promise more or say anything else that might make me reconsider. I set my phone face down on the counter and finished my coffee, looking at the flash drive sitting next to my laptop. Tonight, the truth came out. Tonight, everyone would see what I'd been seeing for weeks. And if Rachel got caught in the blast radius, well, actions have consequences, and she'd earned hers. The County General Hospital annual charity gala was exactly as pretentious as I'd imagined. Which is to say, it looked like someone had taken a Pinterest board labeled classy medical event and vomited it all over the hospital's conference center with no regard for subtlety or taste. There were ice sculptures shaped like stethoscopes because nothing says we care about healthcare quite like expensive frozen water that'll melt into a puddle by the end of the night. White tablecloths covered every surface. Each table featuring centerpieces of roses and leaves that probably cost more than my monthly rent. And a string quartet was playing softly in the corner like this was a 19th century European ball instead of a fundraiser in a mid-sized American city where half the attendees were just here for the open bar and tax-deductible charitable donations. I'd arrived early, dressed in the only suit I owned, a charcoal gray number I'd worn to my wedding, and then subsequently to about 4 funerals, which felt grimly appropriate given what I was about to do. Frank had secured me a ticket through one of his contacts who worked in hospital administration, a woman named Patricia, who'd been one of Gavin's victims 3 years ago, and was absolutely thrilled to facilitate his public execution. She'd even helped me get access to the AV control room earlier in the day, letting me in with her staff badge while I pretended to be checking the security on the door locks and definitely not installing a backup system that would prevent anyone from shutting down the presentation once it started. The room was filling up fast with exactly the kind of people you'd expect at a $500 plate charity dinner. Wealthy donors in designer gowns and tailored tuxedos. Hospital board members who all looked like they'd stepped out of a catalog for successful people who make important decisions. Local politicians gladdening their way through the crowd like they were campaigning even though nobody was voting on anything tonight. And of course, the medical staff, doctors, and nurses dressed in their formal best, pretending they weren't all secretly hoping the bar would stay open late enough to make the speeches tolerable. I spotted Frank near the east entrance looking uncomfortable in a suit that probably hadn't been worn since his daughter's wedding 2 years ago, standing next to Maria Gonzalez from Channel 7 News and at least 3 other journalists I recognized from Frank's briefings. They were all trying to look casual like they were just here for the chicken and the charitable cause. Definitely not waiting for a scandal to erupt that would give them the story of the year. Leia was scattered throughout the crowd with several women I recognized from Frank's victim folder. Jennifer Kaufman, Jessica Torres, Sarah Chun, who'd flown in from Colorado specifically for this. All of them looking nervous and determined in equal measure, like soldiers waiting for a battle they'd been training for their entire lives. Sophie was in the back of the room, exactly where she'd said she'd be, wearing a black dress that made her look like she was attending a funeral, which was fitting since we were about to bury Gavin's career alive. She caught my eye and gave me the smallest nod, a gesture that said, "It's time and good luck and burn it all down." All in one slight movement. The ceremony started at 7:30 with all the pomp and circumstance of people who take themselves way too seriously. The hospital CEO, a silver-haired man named Richard Beaumont, who had the kind of authoritative voice that made you think he'd never been wrong about anything in his entire life, took the stage and launched into a speech about County General's commitment to excellence and community service. He thanked the donors, praised the staff, made some jokes that landed with varying degrees of success, and generally did all the things that people do when they're killing time before the main event. Then came the moment I'd been waiting for. Dr. Alvarez, the chief of staff, a stern woman in her 50s who looked like she'd personally performed open-heart surgery on her own sense of humor and removed it entirely, stepped up to the microphone to introduce the evening's honoree. "It is my great privilege," she began reading from note cards like she was announcing the winner of an Oscar, to present this year's Healer of the Year award to a physician who embodies everything we value at County General Hospital. His dedication to his patients is unmatched. His commitment to excellence in medical care is an inspiration to us all. He represents the very best of what it means to be a healer in our modern healthcare system. Please join me in welcoming to the stage Dr. Gavin Price. The applause started polite at first and then building as Gavin made his way to the stage with the kind of confident stride that comes from someone who genuinely believes they deserve every bit of praise they're about to receive. He looked exactly like he always looked in my mental picture of him. Handsome in that generic television doctor way. Impeccably dressed in a tuxedo that probably cost more than my truck. With that smile that I now recognized as the expression of a predator who'd gotten away with everything and expected to keep getting away with it forever. He shook hands with Dr. Alvarez, accepted the crystal trophy that probably also cost more than my truck, and stepped up to the microphone with the crystal award held high like he just won the Super Bowl of being a terrible human being. The applause continued, and I watched from my position near the AV control room as he basked in it, soaking up the admiration like a plant that had been genetically modified to feed exclusively on ego and false praise. "Thank you," he began, his voice smooth and practiced, the voice of someone who'd given speeches before and knew exactly how to work a crowd. "I am truly humbled by this recognition. When I became a doctor, I made a commitment to serve my patients with compassion, integrity, and that's when I hit the trigger." The lights dimmed slightly. I programmed that into the sequence because if you're going to ruin someone's life, you might as well do it with dramatic lighting. And the massive projection screens on either side of the stage flickered to life. Gavin stopped mid-sentence, confused, turning to look at the screens with that expression people get when technology does something unexpected and they're not sure if it's part of the show or a malfunction. The first slide appeared, a screenshot of the On-Call Club chat group blown up to 15 feet tall and crystal clear in high definition. The group name was visible at the top along with a list of members. 23 names, including Gavin's right at the top with a little crown emoji next to it that designated him as the group administrator. Below that, message after message of crude jokes, conquest comparisons, and the kind of locker room talk that would make a frat boy blush. The room went silent. Not the comfortable silence of people paying attention, but the shocked silence of people trying to process what they're seeing and coming up short on explanations that make sense. Then came the audio. Gavin's voice recorded from one of Sophie's save files playing through the conference center's surround sound system with perfect clarity. Late shift scored me another point. Martinez's wife is easier than I thought. Husband's a locksmith. Ironic since he can't lock down his own marriage. Followed by laughter, is laughter the sound of someone who thought this was hilarious instead of sociopathic. I watched the color drain from Gavin's face as he stood there on stage trapped in a spotlight, watching his own words condemn him on screens the size of billboards. He started to move, reaching for Dr. Alvarez, trying to say something, but the presentation just kept rolling with the mechanical efficiency of truth that doesn't care about excuses. More screenshots. The spreadsheet, his personal achievement log with names redacted but numbers clearly visible. 47 entries over 7 years. Ratings from 1 to 10. Notes about difficulty level and whether they'd been worth the effort. Clinical cold documented proof that this wasn't romance or even just garden variety cheating. This was systematic predation treated like a hobby that required meticulous record keeping. The shock in the room was turning into something else now. Horror, disgust, anger. I could see it rippling through the crowd like a wave. Faces contorting, hands covering mouths, people turning to their neighbors with expressions that asked, "Are you seeing this? And is this real?" People were standing up, some moving closer to see better, others backing away like the screens might be contagious. Rachel, because of course she'd shown up despite my warning, was sitting at a table near the front with some of her nursing colleagues, and I watched her collapse forward with her face in her hands, her whole body shaking with sobs that I could see even from across the room. Leia was crying too, though whether from relief or trauma or just the overwhelming emotion of watching justice finally happen, I couldn't tell. The presentation reached its crescendo. A video clip of Gavin at what looked like a bar drunk and bragging to someone off camera about his conquests, referring to the nurses at County General as his personal hunting ground and joking about how easy it was to manipulate women who were exhausted from double shifts and looking for validation from authority figures. His own face, his own voice, his own words recorded and saved and now playing for everyone to see. I stepped out of the shadows, then walking toward the stage with my hands in my pockets and my heart pounding so hard I thought it might crack my ribs. Someone needed to speak to narrate what everyone was seeing to make sure there was no room for misunderstanding or spin. "Good evening," I said, and my voice came out clear and flat through the microphone system because I planned for this too. Had tested the audio earlier to make sure I could be heard. "My name is Michael Martinez. That's my wife that Dr. Price was bragging about. And what you're watching isn't a misunderstanding or a technical glitch or some kind of elaborate prank. This is documentation. This is evidence. This is Dr. Gavin Price in his own words with his own record showing you exactly who he is when he thinks nobody's watching." The crowd was in full chaos now. People shouting, some trying to leave, others pulling out phones to record what was happening because we lived in an age where if it wasn't on social media, it might as well not have happened. Dr. Alvarez was yelling something at the AV staff, trying to get them to shut it down, but my backup system was doing exactly what I designed it to do, playing through to the end regardless of what buttons anyone pushed. Gavin finally found his voice and he started to flail verbally, trying to explain, to excuse, to spin this into something other than what it obviously was. "This is taken out of context. This is a violation of my privacy. You don't understand. Is there a warranty on that charm?" I called out, my voice cutting through his protest with the kind of dry sarcasm that had gotten me through the last 3 weeks because it seems to be malfunctioning pretty badly right now. Some people laughed, nervous, shocked laughter, the kind that happens when something is so awful that humor becomes a defense mechanism. Others just stared, and in their faces, I saw the dawning realization that everything they thought they knew about Dr. Gavin Price was a carefully constructed lie. Security was moving toward the stage now, not to stop the presentation, but to escort Gavin out as the crowd turned hostile. People were shouting at him, "You broke us, and how could you?" And phrases considerably less polite that I'm not going to repeat because this story is already dark enough without adding creative profanity. The presentation ended exactly 12 minutes after it started. The screens going dark and the lights coming back up to reveal a room full of people who would never look at County General Hospital or Dr. Gavin Price the same way again. Mission accomplished. Morning news, social media, text messages, the whole digital universe exploded overnight. Gavin was on administrative leave, probably getting fired once the lawyers figured out how to phrase it without getting sued. The hospital launched an internal inquiry, which is corporate speak for, "We're going to look really busy while we figure out how to cover our asses." Some nurses came by to say thank you. Others wouldn't make eye contact. Small towns are brutal with gossip. And Rachel's reputation was thoroughly torched. She might keep her job. She might not. Honestly, not my problem anymore. Sophie disappeared like a spy who'd completed her mission. Leia left town to teach spin classes somewhere with fewer whispers. Frank went back to his pie work, cracking fewer jokes about retirement. I went home to a house that felt different. Not empty, just honest. The locksmith finally had his favorite kind of quiet, unlocked. I didn't want to destroy anyone. I just wanted truth. Turns out truth was cleaner than living a lie. They thought they'd locked me out. They forgot who makes the keys.